The people who look the most powerful are often the least prepared to meet someone who is not impressed by power. On a rainy Thursday evening in Manhattan, the dining room of Sinclair House glowed beneath crystal chandeliers and soft golden light. The restaurant was known for its elegance, its celebrity guests, and one customer in particular. The moment Victoria Sinclair's reservation appeared on the screen, a wave of tension moved through the staff. Conversations became quieter. Managers checked every detail twice. Even experienced servers exchanged nervous glances. Victoria Sinclair was not a movie star or a politician. She was the wife of billionaire investor Richard Sinclair, and over the years she had earned a reputation that made grown professionals uneasy. Some said she could find fault in a perfect evening. Others claimed she enjoyed testing people simply because she could. Whatever the truth was, nobody volunteered to serve her table. Nobody except Olivia Bennett. Olivia had started working at Sinclair House only 3 weeks earlier. At 29 years old, she carried herself with a calm confidence that seemed unusual for someone new. Her blonde hair was neatly tied back beneath the restaurant standards. Her black apron was spotless. Her blue eyes moved carefully through the room, observing more than most people realized. When the manager looked around for a server, Olivia simply stepped forward. "I can take the table," she said. The room fell strangely silent. One veteran waiter almost laughed. Another shook his head as if watching someone walk into a storm without an umbrella. The manager hesitated. "Are you sure?" Olivia smiled politely. "It is only a table." 20 minutes later, a black luxury sedan stopped outside the restaurant. Through the rain-covered windows, staff watched Victoria Sinclair emerge beneath a large umbrella held by an assistant. She entered wearing an elegant cream-colored designer coat and carrying the kind of confidence that made people move aside without being asked. Every eye in the restaurant followed her. Victoria noticed. She was accustomed to that reaction. The hostess greeted her immediately and escorted her toward the best table in the house. As Victoria settled into her chair, Olivia approached carrying a menu and a glass of water. Their eyes met for the first time. Victoria's gaze moved slowly from Olivia's face to her apron and back again. It was the kind of look that measured people before learning their names. Olivia offered a warm professional smile. "Good evening. My name is Olivia. I will be taking care of you tonight." Victoria barely glanced at the menu. "You are new." It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria leaned back slightly. "Interesting." The word carried a meaning Olivia understood immediately. Around them, nearby employees watched discreetly. They had seen this pattern before. Victoria liked to establish control early. Yet Olivia showed no sign of discomfort. She simply stood calmly with her order pad in hand. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, something far more important had begun. Neither woman knew it yet, but before the evening ended, the balance of power in that room would begin to shift in a way nobody expected. Victoria Sinclair continued studying Olivia with the same expression people used when inspecting an object rather than meeting a person. The silence stretched for several seconds before she finally opened the menu. "Tell me," she said without looking up, "how long do new employees usually last here?" Olivia remained professional. "I'm not sure, ma'am." Victoria glanced up. "That is an honest answer. Most people would invent something." Nearby servers pretended not to listen, but every one of them was paying attention. They knew what came next. Victoria rarely asked questions because she wanted information. She asked questions because she enjoyed watching people struggle to answer them. Olivia waited calmly. Victoria closed the menu. "Do you know who I am?" The question hung in the air. Olivia nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria leaned back in her chair. "And that does not make you nervous?" A faint smile appeared on Olivia's face. "Should it?" One of the bartenders nearly dropped a glass. Victoria's eyebrows lifted slightly. For the first time, something unexpected crossed her expression. Not anger, curiosity. Most people rushed to reassure her. Most people immediately apologized for things she had not even criticized yet. Olivia did neither. She simply stood there, calm and composed. Victoria tapped a finger against the table. "Interesting answer." Olivia waited. "What would you recommend tonight?" Victoria asked. The question sounded simple enough. Olivia described several dishes with confidence and precision. She explained ingredients, preparation methods, and wine pairings without hesitation. Her knowledge was impressive, especially for someone who had only been at the restaurant a few weeks. Victoria listened carefully. Then she interrupted. You speak like someone who owns the restaurant. Olivia smiled. No, ma'am. I just believe customers deserve accurate information. Victoria nodded slowly. Again, not the answer she expected. Around the room, guests continued their meals beneath sparkling chandeliers. Rain still traced patterns across the tall windows facing the street. Yet an invisible tension remained concentrated at table 12. Victoria finally ordered. Nothing unusual. No special requests. No complaints. The staff found that more alarming than if she had criticized the menu. When Olivia returned with the first course, Victoria examined the presentation carefully. Every detail appeared perfect. The plate was exactly as requested. The temperature was correct. The timing was flawless. Still, Victoria searched for something to criticize. Olivia could almost see it happening. You seem very confident for someone new, Victoria said. Olivia placed the dish gently on the table. I try to do my job well. Victoria looked up. And if someone important told you that you were not good enough? The question carried more weight than the others. Olivia paused for only a moment. Then I would listen carefully. Victoria appeared satisfied. Finally, a safer answer. But Olivia continued. If the criticism was fair, I would improve. If it was unfair, I would keep doing my best anyway. The silence that followed felt different. Victoria stared at her. So did several nearby customers. Olivia's tone had remained respectful. She had not challenged anyone. Yet somehow her answer carried a quiet strength that could not be ignored. For the first time that evening, Victoria Sinclair realized something unusual. The young waitress standing before her was not intimidated. And that realization made the evening far more interesting than she had expected. The atmosphere around table 12 continued changing in subtle ways. At first, only the staff noticed. Then a few nearby guests began paying attention, not because anyone was raising their voice. Quite the opposite. The most interesting moments often arrived in silence. Victoria Sinclair sat beneath the glow of the chandelier, studying Olivia Bennett with increasing interest. The young waitress had responded to every question with professionalism, patience, and an unusual level of confidence. Most people either became nervous around Victoria or tried too hard to impress her. Olivia did neither. She simply remained herself. That alone made her stand out. As the evening progressed, Victoria ordered a glass of imported sparkling water. Olivia delivered it promptly. Victoria examined the label before setting the bottle down. Do you know where this comes from? She asked. The question sounded casual. Olivia recognized another test. Northern Italy, near the foothills of the Alps, she replied. The mineral composition is one reason many guests prefer it. Victoria blinked once. Across the room, a server carrying wine nearly stopped walking. Victoria tilted her head slightly. You seem to know a great deal for someone working in an apron. Olivia smiled politely. Learning is free. I try to do it often. A few customers exchanged amused glances. The answer was respectful, yet there was something quietly powerful inside it. Victoria noticed the reaction. For the first time that evening, she became aware that other people were watching. She was accustomed to being the center of attention. She was less accustomed to sharing it. A few minutes later, another opportunity appeared. A businessman seated nearby accidentally dropped a document folder while standing to leave. Papers scattered across the floor. Before anyone else could react, Olivia moved quickly, helping gather the pages. One sheet contained several columns of financial projections. Olivia handed it back immediately. The businessman smiled gratefully. Thank you. Then he paused. You noticed that error? Olivia nodded toward one figure. I think 1% may have been entered twice. The businessman glanced down. His eyes widened. You are right. Victoria heard every word. So did several nearby guests. The businessman laughed softly. You just saved me from a very awkward meeting tomorrow. Olivia shrugged gently. I am glad I could help. She returned to her duties as though nothing unusual had happened. Victoria watched her leave. Something about the moment bothered her. Not because Olivia had done anything wrong. Because admiration was beginning to move in a direction Victoria did not control. Later, while dessert menus were being distributed, Victoria looked up once more. Tell me, Olivia, have you always worked in restaurants? Olivia met her gaze. No, ma'am. Victoria sensed an opening. Then what did you do before? The room seemed to grow quieter again. Olivia folded her hands behind her back. Many different things. Victoria smiled slightly. That sounds like a story. Olivia's expression remained calm. Most people have one. For the first time all evening, Victoria had no immediate response. And as rain continued falling beyond the windows of Sinclair House, curiosity slowly replaced certainty. The woman who had expected to evaluate a waitress was beginning to realize she might have underestimated her. By the time dessert service began, the atmosphere inside Sinclair House had shifted in a way few people could explain. Nothing dramatic had happened. No arguments. No scenes. No raised voices. Yet an invisible current now moved through the dining room. More guests were watching table 12 than before. More employees found reasons to pass nearby. The evening had become a quiet contest, and everyone sensed it. Victoria Sinclair sensed it most of all. For years, she had entered rooms knowing exactly how events would unfold. People admired her, feared her, or attempted to impress her. The pattern rarely changed. Tonight felt different. Tonight, a waitress was disrupting a script that had worked for years. Victoria studied Olivia as she delivered coffee to another table. The young woman moved with calm efficiency, never appearing rushed despite the crowded restaurant. Every guest received the same courtesy. Every interaction felt genuine. There was no performance. That somehow made it more impressive. When Olivia returned to table 12, Victoria closed her dessert menu and made a decision. If simple questions were not enough, she would raise the stakes. "Olivia," she said, "you seem very knowledgeable." Olivia smiled politely. "Thank you, ma'am." Victoria gestured toward a nearby table where several executives were discussing international business. "Tell me something. If you are so interested in learning, perhaps you can answer a question for me." A few nearby guests immediately became attentive. Victoria continued. "Which language do you think is most important for international negotiations today?" The question sounded harmless, but Olivia recognized the intention behind it. Victoria was creating a public test, one designed to expose a weakness. Olivia considered the question for a moment. "That depends on the goal." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Olivia remained calm. "If the goal is commerce, there are several useful answers. If the goal is trust, the most important language is respect. People can hire translators for everything else." Silence followed. Not awkward silence. The kind that appears when people hear something unexpectedly true. Several guests exchanged glances. One executive smiled into his coffee. Victoria leaned back slowly. "That sounds rehearsed." Olivia shook her head. "No, ma'am. Just observed." Again, the answer landed perfectly. Again, there was nothing disrespectful about it. Yet somehow Victoria found herself losing ground she could not see. At that exact moment, another figure entered the restaurant. Richard Sinclair. Unlike his wife, Richard rarely attracted attention intentionally. He preferred quiet observation to public influence. As he approached the table, he immediately noticed the unusual mood surrounding it. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked. Victoria smiled. "Not at all." Richard greeted Olivia politely. "Good evening." "Good evening, sir." The contrast between husband and wife became obvious immediately. Richard treated her like a professional. Victoria treated her like a challenge. Richard sat down and listened as Victoria casually summarized parts of the evening. As she spoke, he occasionally glanced toward Olivia. More specifically, he noticed how every employee seemed to respect her. He noticed how customers smiled when she passed. He noticed something Victoria had overlooked: confidence without arrogance. A rare combination. Outside, the rain finally began to ease. Inside, however, the evening was only becoming more complicated. Because for the first time, Victoria Sinclair was no longer controlling the narrative. And somewhere deep beneath her polished confidence, that realization had started to bother her more than she cared to admit. Richard Sinclair rarely spoke more than necessary during dinner. Years in business had taught him that observation often revealed more than conversation. As coffee arrived at the table, he quietly watched the interactions unfolding around him. The longer he observed, the more unusual the evening seemed. Employees who normally avoided table 12 appeared strangely relaxed whenever Olivia approached. Customers smiled when she spoke. Even the restaurant manager, who usually monitored Victoria's visits with visible anxiety, seemed less concerned than usual. Richard noticed all of it. Victoria noticed something different. She noticed attention shifting away from her. Not dramatically, not openly, just enough to make her uncomfortable. Throughout her life, She had built an identity around being the most important person in the room. Tonight, people seemed increasingly interested in the waitress wearing a black apron. That realization settled heavily inside her. Olivia, meanwhile, continued working exactly as she had all evening. She greeted arriving guests, helped a nervous young server correct a small mistake, delivered meals with professionalism and warmth. She never inserted herself into conversations, never tried to impress anyone. Ironically, that made her more impressive. At one point, a couple celebrating their anniversary requested a specific dessert that was no longer listed on the menu. Before the kitchen could decline the request, Olivia spoke briefly with the pastry chef. 20 minutes later, the dessert arrived exactly as the guests remembered it from years earlier. The couple looked delighted. Nearby diners noticed. So did Richard. She seems very good at her job, he remarked casually. Victoria stirred her coffee. She is a waitress. Richard looked toward Olivia. That does not answer what I said. The response surprised Victoria. Richard almost never challenged her opinions publicly. The silence that followed felt uncomfortable, not because of the words themselves, because they revealed a difference in perspective. Richard saw competence. Victoria saw status. The distinction mattered more than either realized. A short time later, another unexpected moment occurred. One of the restaurant's regular guests recognized Richard and approached the table. The man greeted him warmly before glancing toward Olivia. Your server tonight is exceptional. Richard smiled. So I have noticed. The guest nodded. She helped my daughter prepare for a college interview last month. Victoria looked up immediately. A college interview? The man laughed softly. My daughter was terrified. Olivia spent an hour after her shift helping her practice questions. She refused any payment. He shook his head with admiration. People do not do things like that very often anymore. After the guest left, Victoria sat quietly for several seconds. The story bothered her more than she expected. Every new detail seemed to add another layer to a person she had already judged. Olivia was no longer fitting neatly into the assumptions Victoria preferred. Across the dining room, Olivia helped clear a table near the windows. The rain had finally stopped. Manhattan shimmered beneath reflections of city lights. For a brief moment, Olivia glanced outside. She looked peaceful, unaffected by the attention surrounding her, unconcerned with who admired her and who did not. Richard noticed that too. You know, he said quietly, the most confident people I have ever met usually spend very little time reminding everyone how important they are. Victoria immediately understood the meaning behind the statement. She said nothing, but for the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared behind her carefully controlled expression, because somewhere deep down, she had begun realizing a difficult truth. The room was no longer measuring Olivia against her expectations. The room was beginning to measure Victoria against Olivia. The evening should have ended there. Most people expected it would. Victoria Sinclair had already spent hours testing a waitress who refused to be rattled. Richard Sinclair had quietly made his observations. The guests had begun forming their own conclusions. Yet something inside Victoria would not allow the matter to rest. She needed one final answer, one final explanation. She needed to understand why the young woman standing in a black apron seemed immune to the pressure that affected everyone else. As the restaurant gradually moved toward the final hours of service, Victoria watched Olivia helping a new employee near the service station. The younger server appeared anxious after making a small mistake on an order. Olivia spoke softly, offered guidance, and within moments the employee looked visibly relieved. There was no frustration, no criticism, just patience. Victoria found herself studying the interaction more closely than she intended. Eventually, when Olivia returned to table 12, Victoria spoke again. You handle pressure unusually well. Olivia smiled politely. Thank you, ma'am. Victoria folded her hands together. Most people become nervous when they are being evaluated. Olivia looked slightly amused. Perhaps that depends on who is doing the evaluating. Richard nearly smiled into his coffee. Victoria noticed. So did Olivia. Yet nobody commented. The conversation continued. You still have not told me what you did before this job, Victoria said. Olivia glanced briefly toward the dining room before answering. Several years ago, I worked in corporate consulting. The words landed with surprising force. Victoria stared at her. Richard looked up immediately. Corporate consulting? Olivia nodded. Yes, sir. Richard leaned forward slightly. For which firms? Olivia named two respected international consulting companies. Both were widely known within executive circles. For the first time all evening, genuine surprise appeared on Richard's face. Victoria remained silent. Olivia continued only because they seemed curious. I worked there for several years before my father became ill. After he passed away, I stepped away from that world for a while. Life became more important than career titles. The dining room suddenly felt quieter. Not because people were listening intentionally, because the truth carried a weight no performance could imitate. Victoria slowly processed the information. The assumptions she had made throughout the evening began collapsing one by one. She had seen an apron and imagined limitations. She had seen a waitress and assumed simplicity. Now she was realizing how little she actually knew. Richard nodded thoughtfully. That explains a great deal. Olivia smiled. Perhaps. Victoria looked at her carefully. Then why stay here? It was an honest question this time. No trap. No challenge. Olivia answered without hesitation. Because I enjoy it. Victoria blinked. That is all. Olivia glanced around the restaurant. Families sharing meals. Couples celebrating milestones. Employees helping one another. Not every meaningful job happens inside a corner office. The statement was gentle, yet it carried more wisdom than many boardroom presentations. Richard smiled openly. Victoria looked away for a moment. Outside, the clouds had cleared completely. Manhattan shimmered beneath thousands of lights. Inside Sinclair House, something equally important was becoming visible. The most impressive thing about Olivia Bennet was not her education, not her experience, not even her intelligence. It was the fact that she never felt the need to prove any of it. And that realization was beginning to change the room in ways Victoria could no longer ignore. The revelation about Olivia Bennet's past should have ended the evening's quiet competition. For most people, it would have. The young waitress had demonstrated intelligence, professionalism, and humility without ever attempting to impress anyone. Richard Sinclair seemed genuinely interested in learning more about her. Even several nearby guests now looked at Olivia with obvious admiration. Yet Victoria Sinclair felt something else. A growing discomfort she could not fully explain. It was not anger. Not exactly. It was the unsettling realization that her assumptions had failed her. For someone accustomed to judging situations quickly, that realization felt unfamiliar. The dining room had grown calmer as the evening moved toward closing time. Soft music drifted through the restaurant. Crystal glasses reflected warm light. Employees began preparing for the final hour of service. Olivia continued helping guests with the same steady focus she had shown all evening. She never acted differently after revealing her background. That detail bothered Victoria most. Many people would have used such information to elevate themselves. Olivia treated it as though it barely mattered. Eventually, Victoria made one final attempt to regain control of the narrative. As Olivia approached the table with fresh coffee, Victoria smiled politely. It was the kind of smile people often mistook for kindness. "You have certainly surprised everyone tonight," she said. Olivia nodded. "That was never my intention." Victoria lifted her cup. "No? Then perhaps you can explain something." Olivia waited. "If you are as accomplished as you seem to be, why would you choose a position where most people overlook you?" Several nearby guests fell silent. Richard immediately recognized what his wife was doing. One final test. One final opportunity to expose a weakness. Olivia considered the question carefully. Then she smiled. "Because being overlooked teaches you things visibility never can." Victoria remained silent. Olivia continued. "When people think your job defines your worth, they often reveal who they really are." The words landed gently, yet their impact was undeniable. A nearby executive lowered his gaze into his coffee. An older couple exchanged knowing smiles. Richard looked toward Olivia with growing respect. Victoria felt the room shifting once again. Not because Olivia had attacked her, because Olivia had answered honestly. The distinction mattered. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then something unexpected happened. A woman seated near the windows stood from her table and approached. She looked to be in her late 60s. Elegant. Composed. "Excuse me," she said. I could not help overhearing. Olivia appeared slightly embarrassed. The woman smiled warmly. "Young lady, I have spent 40 years leading charitable organizations. Your answer may be one of the wisest things I have heard in months." The room grew even quieter. Victoria stared at her coffee. Richard smiled openly. Olivia simply thanked the woman and returned to her work. No celebration, no victory, no dramatic reaction. That was what made the moment so powerful. Olivia did not need the room's approval. She never had. As closing time approached, the balance that had existed at the beginning of the evening no longer remained. Victoria Sinclair entered Sinclair House expecting everyone to adjust themselves around her presence. Instead, she had encountered someone who could not be intimidated, purchased, or diminished. Someone whose confidence came from character rather than status. And for the first time in many years, Victoria found herself confronting a difficult truth. The person she had tried hardest to evaluate had quietly revealed far more about her than about themselves. Closing time arrived at Sinclair House with an unusual feeling lingering in the air. The restaurant remained elegant as always. The chandeliers still glowed. Soft music still floated through the dining room. Yet everyone sensed that something important had happened. Not because of a scandal, not because of a dramatic confrontation, because people had witnessed something far rarer. They had watched character reveal itself. Olivia Bennet continued clearing tables as though the evening had been completely ordinary. That alone impressed people even more. Most individuals who received unexpected praise spent time enjoying the attention. Olivia seemed almost unaware of it. She thanked guests when they complimented her and then returned to work. The humility felt genuine because it was. Victoria Sinclair sat quietly for longer than anyone expected. The confidence she carried when she first entered the restaurant had not disappeared, but it had changed. Some assumptions had been challenged. Some judgments had been exposed. The process was uncomfortable. Yet deep down, she knew it had also been necessary. Richard Sinclair finished his coffee and glanced toward Olivia. Then he looked back at his wife. "You know," he said calmly, "I think tonight taught all of us something." Victoria offered a faint smile. "Including me?" Richard nodded. "Especially us." Victoria did not respond immediately. Across the room, Olivia was helping the staff prepare for closing. There was something remarkable about the scene. The woman who had become the center of attention spent her time supporting everyone else. The contrast was impossible to ignore. A few moments later, Richard stood from the table. To Victoria's surprise, he walked directly toward Olivia. Several guests noticed. So did the employees. Olivia looked up as he approached. "Is everything all right, sir?" Richard smiled warmly. "More than all right." He paused briefly. "I simply wanted to thank you." Olivia appeared confused. "For dinner?" Richard shook his head. "For reminding people that dignity and professionalism still matter." The words carried through the quiet dining room. Not loudly, but clearly enough. Several guests smiled. One or two even nodded in agreement. Olivia seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the attention. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. "I was only doing my job." Richard's smile widened. "That is exactly the point." Back at the table, Victoria watched the exchange. For years she had believed respect came from status, wealth, influence, and social position. Yet tonight she had watched an entire room offer respect to someone who possessed none of those advantages. Or perhaps, she suddenly realized, Olivia possessed something far more valuable. Character. The realization settled heavily inside her. Not because it embarrassed her, because it was true. As guests gradually departed, several stopped to thank Olivia personally. Others complimented her service. A few wished her well. None of it felt forced. None of it had been requested. Respect had emerged naturally. The most powerful kind always did. Finally, Victoria rose from her chair. The room seemed to hold its breath. Nobody knew what she might say. She walked toward Olivia slowly. The young waitress turned and offered the same polite smile she had offered all evening. Victoria studied her for a moment. Then she spoke quietly. "You have had a remarkable evening." Olivia smiled. "I hope you enjoyed yours as well." For the first time since entering the restaurant, Victoria laughed softly. Not out of superiority, out of genuine appreciation. The answer was perfect. As she and Richard prepared to leave Sinclair House, one truth had become impossible to deny. The person who appeared most important at the beginning of the night was not the person people admired at the end. Respect had chosen its own destination, and it could not be purchased. 3 weeks later, Sinclair House looked exactly as it always had. The chandeliers still cast warm light across polished tables. The windows still reflected the movement of Manhattan beyond the glass. Guests still arrived expecting an exceptional evening. Yet for those who had witnessed that rainy Thursday night, something felt different. not in the restaurant itself. In the people. Olivia Bennet continued working her shifts with the same quiet professionalism. She never spoke about the attention she had received, never mentioned the conversations that had spread through the city afterward. She arrived on time, tied on her black apron, greeted guests warmly, and treated every person with equal respect. Success had not changed her because recognition had never been her goal. One evening, as autumn sunlight faded beyond the skyline, an unexpected reservation appeared on the schedule. The name immediately caught the manager's attention. Victoria Sinclair. Several employees exchanged curious glances. Word spread quietly through the dining room. Some wondered whether old tensions might return. Others simply waited to see what would happen. Shortly after 7 o'clock, Victoria entered the restaurant. This time there was something noticeably different about her presence. The confidence remained. The elegance remained. Yet the invisible pressure that once surrounded her seemed absent. She walked through the dining room calmly and took her seat near the same window where everything had begun. A few moments later, Olivia approached the table carrying a menu. Their eyes met. The memory of that evening existed between them, but neither woman mentioned it. Olivia smiled. "Good evening. It is nice to see you again." Victoria returned the smile. A genuine one. "It is nice to see you too, Olivia." The nearby staff immediately noticed the difference. So did Richard Sinclair when he arrived several minutes later. As dinner progressed, the conversation felt remarkably normal. No tests, no challenges, no hidden traps disguised as questions. They spoke about books, about travel, about the city. At one point, Victoria even asked Olivia for a recommendation from the menu and accepted it without debate. The simplicity of the moment carried more meaning than any dramatic apology ever could. Near the end of the meal, Victoria looked around the restaurant. Families laughed together. Friends shared stories over coffee. Employees moved confidently through the dining room. Then her attention returned to Olivia. "I spent a long time believing respect came from being important," she said quietly. Olivia listened without interruption. Victoria smiled slightly. "I think I finally understand that it comes from how you make people feel." Olivia considered the statement. Then she nodded. "That is something many people spend years learning." Richard smiled into his coffee. The evening continued peacefully after that. No audience. No applause. No grand speeches. Just 3 people sharing an honest conversation. When the Sinclairs eventually stood to leave, Victoria paused near the entrance. She turned back toward Olivia. "Thank you," she said. Olivia tilted her head slightly. "For dinner." Victoria laughed softly. "For the lesson." Olivia smiled. "You are welcome." Outside, the city lights shimmered across the sidewalks after a brief afternoon rain. Inside Sinclair House, the final traces of an old misunderstanding had quietly disappeared. Some victories arrive through power. Others arrive through patience. Olivia Bennet never raised her voice. She never demanded respect. She simply lived in a way that earned it. And in the end, that proved more powerful than anything money could buy. The strongest people are often the ones who never need to prove their strength at all.